Anthony, tell me why we're out here today.
Well, we're basically out here because of Liu Xiaobo, who's a Chinese writer who was sentenced to 11 years in prison on Christmas Day, actually, for, according to the court, for publishing about 250 Chinese characters, which we're going to read today so that people can decide whether they think that's a good reason for sending someone to prison for 11 years. At Penn, we've been having a campaign now for a while trying to really deal with the question of free expression in China and the fact that there are scores of Chinese bloggers and writers in prison, but Liu Xiaobo is the most important of them. That's why they picked on him, and he's a former head of independent Chinese Penn, and he's been an activist for free expression and for free rights more generally in China for a long time. He's also a distinguished poet.
Yeah. The Chinese government, as you well know, better than I do, and probably better than most of my audience members know, has been reticent to listen to pressure from the outside. You must have been disappointed about the execution of the British man who was bipolar. The British government asked the Chinese to stay the execution. They seem not to care about voices calling for human rights from outside the nation.
Well, they don't care much for voices for human rights from within the nation either, because that's why they've locked Liu Xiaobo up. No, I mean, we have to keep going because I think China has moved a great deal in a good direction over the last 30 years. You have to remember that there were many, many more political prisoners in China 30 years ago. But they've decided to focus on locking people up, basically, shutting people up, who question the continuing dominance of the Communist Party and its refusal to allow other voices, other political forces to express themselves. And the way they've chosen to do this is to, as I say, to try and shut them up. The Chinese government always says that this is interference in their internal affairs. But the fact is that human rights abuses are the business of all human beings, not just the business of Chinese human beings. And we're just adding our voices to the voices of the many Chinese, and the many British, and the many Swedes, and the many Namibians, who all agree with us that this is not how you should treat someone, that he's entitled to speak, as he does, for the fate of his own country. And that if Chinese people want to listen to him and want to put pressure on the government, that's their right. And it's his right not just under international law, but under the Chinese Constitution itself. The Chinese Constitution, Article 35 of the Chinese Constitution, promises free expression, free press, the right to protest, guarantees all these things. So not only is this a breach of his human rights, not only is it a breach of international law, it's a breach of the Chinese Constitution. If anybody should be locked up for this, it's the people who've locked him up, because they're the ones who are breaking the law.
One last question. How do you rate the new Obama administration's posturing towards human rights issues in China?
Well, we're very grateful to the president because we wrote to him before he went to China asking him to raise the issue of human rights in China, and particularly to raise the issue of Liu Xiaobo. As far as we know, he did. I think at the moment the Chinese are in a mood to show that they don't care very much what anybody thinks about anything. They blew the world off in Copenhagen. They're blowing us off about this. They blew the British off about, and many people around the world off about executing a mentally unbalanced person. So I think for some reason they're in a sort of taking notice of as well. They don't currently have a decent respect for the opinion of mankind. But many Chinese people do, and I think that the fact that we outside and many people inside China are arguing that they need to move more in the direction of free expression and other freedoms is eventually, I think, going to pay off. We've campaigned for many, many writers over the last 50 years in every continent. And by and large, we've been successful in the end, in the sense that most of them have ended up out of prison. We're hopeful that in 2010 we'll get Liu Xiaobo out of prison, and that this ridiculous 11-year sentence will be revoked.